Next generation. They're on the stage here. I know there's a lot of excitement about this panel. These are folks that need to make sure the racing industry is going to be here 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. So they have a lot of thoughts that they're going to share with us today. And we have an amazing moderator, Donna Barton Brothers. So I'll turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. Well, you can tell that Bob Baffert and Todd Pletcher aren't in the room anymore, but I think you all will be impressed by this young and precocious panel. So as Bob said, this panel is investing in racing's future. You're going to hear perspectives from the next generation. This panel is comprised of members of HISA's Next Generation Advisory Group. Some of the ideas that they're going to present today have been discussed on their Next Gen meetings. However, a lot of them are also their own, and this isn't so much about what's happened in those meetings as much as the ideas that they have for bringing racing forward. So let's meet our panel. Right down there on the end, we have Sam Reinhart, who is Assistant General Counsel at HISA. Sam holds 2 degrees, one from the University of Kentucky, a Bachelor of Business Administration, and then a Juris Doctorate from the College of Law. He's right down there at the very end. Next to him, we have Alexa Ravit, who's the Director of Communications and Outreach, Horseracing Integrity and Welfare Unit. Alexa earned her master's degree through the University of Arizona's Racetrack Industry Program. Next to Alexa, we have Jeff Matty Jr., who's Executive Director at the Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association. Jeff graduated from St. Joseph's University with a degree in sports marketing. Next to him is Naja Thompson, Executive Director, New York Thoroughbred Breeders. Naja is also the President of the Turf Publicist of America and is on the Board of Directors for NYRA. And then right here at the end is Eric DeCoster. Eric is a racing official at Oaklawn Park and Assistant Racing Secretary at Prairie Meadows, and he is also a graduate of the RTIP program. You can dig a little deeper into their bios on the symposium's website, but you're soon going to learn that while they're all young, at least compared to me and many of the people in the room, they are precocious. It's worth noting that they are all members of HISA's Next Generation Committee, and there are subcommittees associated with that, such as equine safety, data science, jockey safety and welfare, and some of them are also involved in those subcommittees. This panel has worked together to decide upon today's topics, and we're going to begin with equine safety and welfare. And for that, I'm going to move over here to join our panel. So I guess there's no better place to talk about equine safety and welfare than to begin with the attorney with HISA. So we're going to start with you, Sam. I'm going to let you take the lead on this just because of all the initiatives we've seen from HISA.
Sure. Thank you, Donna. I think my mic's working.
Yeah.
Thank you to Robert and the RTIP program. First, just congratulations on 50 years. What an incredible accomplishment. I also just wanted to thank whoever decided that I was a next generation. I appreciate that, and I'm extremely honored to be on stage with this incredibly talented and engaged set of individuals that are up here. So the title of this presentation is, sharing your perspectives on next generation. And given that this is only my second conference that I attended, I thought it was worth taking 20 seconds to share sort of my introduction to the game, so you can understand where I'm coming from. I really fell in love with the game in high school and college. It started with gambling and wagering. Quickly fell in love with the sport, the horse, the racetrack experience, and kind of that set the stage for the next couple of years. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a racing partnership. I practiced law before coming to HISA. At a firm doing equine work. And obviously now I've been with HISA for nearly the last 2 years, started in March of 23. So I bring that's kind of where I'm coming from when I'm sharing my perspectives. And a little inside baseball, I've never been on one of these panels before, so I'm learning how they work. But we brainstormed, as Donna mentioned, talking points for today, and we were asked to identify 3 or 4 keys to the future of horse racing. And I think it's no surprise that all of us had some form of safety and welfare in our list. It's not a novel concept. It's not one that's specific to next generation. I think everybody in the room would have it on their list. But what I think it is it's a reflection that we agree that needs to continue to be prioritized. Because they've got some other really interesting and innovative ideas for expanding and growing the game that are really great. But those things don't matter if we don't put the health and safety of the riders and the horses first. And so sort of bringing it back to HISA and Next Gen, we meet once a month or every other month. And, the core topics are health and safety, but data and analytics come up, multiple times every single meeting. Donna mentioned that we have a subcommittee that's focused on data analytics. So there are a number of HISA initiatives, but the one that I think I'm particularly extremely excited and encouraged about is now we've got a single organization that's collecting data, and we're incredibly grateful for the trainers, the owners, the vets, the racetracks, the medical directors, everybody that submits that data, such that we now have a national set of data that we can leverage and we can combine with the machine learning and the AI that was talked about earlier to really identify and improve upon safety initiatives. So
you're referring to Dr. Dionne Benson and her presentation with all those data points.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
And referring to the HISA check, referring to the HISA Horse Insight programs. I think just, we're all really excited about all of the data and leveraging the data to identify safety trends, identify safety initiatives, and learn more. And perhaps the most exciting part for us is, data will lead you to places that maybe we never, as an industry, thought. And so that's really exciting. And encouraging. And just briefly, I don't think you can't talk about health and safety without talking about the jockeys. And there's obviously a physical and a mental well-being component to that. And we've seen initiatives, whether it's head check or a national concussion protocol, but it's equally as important on the mental side. And I attended the International Jockey Wellness Conference that you moderated a couple months ago, and I was already incredibly impressed jockeys, but I walked away and after hearing their stories of not eating, not drinking, going to saunas, some of the challenges that they had to deal with, and layer on top of that there's social media now where you can message a jockey if you don't like the way they rode, and all of the challenges they've had to deal with. So one of the things I'm most proud of being a part of HISA with is the recent partnership that we had with the Guild, where we partnered with OnRise to provide a confidential, free platform that's available to jockeys, gives them somebody to talk to, whether they're looking for career coaching, what am I going to do next, or maybe they had a rough race and they're in a dark place and just need somebody to talk to. So. I know that's very broad, but I think to sum it up, the health and safety needs to continue to be a priority, and I think from our perspective, we're excited about the technology and where that'll take us.
Well, you can't really talk about equine safety without talking about the riders who are on those horses. And so also they have to work with the tracks, and I know, Naja, you all have worked at NARA to sort of model some programs there.
Yes, that's right, Donna, and it's really about our social license. What are we going to do to ensure that our social license is protected so that we continue to grow our sport? In New York, we've worked on a number of initiatives. We have an aftercare or second career assessment fee that's applied on all claims of 1.5%. That goes to a fund directly for the TAA, and NITHA, the New York Thoroughbred Horsemen Association, has a Take the Lead second career program. So we're ensuring that our equine athletes are taken care of in the welfare space for when they leave the racetrack. And that's going to help our social license in making sure when we're communicating to our current fans and future fans that we're protecting and ensuring that the athletes that are racing and competing weekly, month to month, also are transitioning to second careers outside of the sport.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we will be judged by how we treat our athletes, particularly after they've lost their usefulness on the racetrack. And so, Alexa, I know you have some thoughts on that and the OTTB programs out there.
Sure, yeah. I wanted to combine what Sam said and what Naj said from my role at HIWU with the anti-doping and medication control program, of how the regulation of controlled medications and banned substances, how that is promoting the safety and welfare of horses, both while they're active racehorses, but also when they go on to their second careers. Because, Don, I think, as you know, that a horse that is sound enough to be ridden and to have an athletic second career, it's easier to place them and they end up in safer situations. So there's that aspect of it. And then you mentioned the idea of rescues. As someone who, I grew up riding horses, I have plenty of social media connections with people who I went to horse camp with or just rode with at various points of, there is this stigma association that if you're getting an ex-racehorse, it was rescued from somewhere, which the vast majority of the time is not the case. So I think it's, from that perspective, important that we're doing everything on our end when they're active racehorses, that when it transitions to their second careers as sport horses or whatever we're doing, that there's that positive association.
Yeah, sort of stomp out that little smoke when you see it so that it doesn't keep a misnomer that just sort of keeps getting carried on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Eric, I think you've also wanted to sort of talk about, like, we need to show what we're doing also.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can do all of these wonderful things that Naja, Sam, and Alexa talked about, but at the end of the day, our social license to operate isn't going to last long until we promote this. And it's not about reacting. It's not about saying X amount of horses started and X amount of horses finished. It's leading and taking the stance. That way that no one has to ask what we're doing for these horses. And it's not just second career and aftercare. And it's from the beginning of their lives. It's how they go through their entire racing and training careers and then into those careers and promoting that very heavily. And that starts really at the racetrack level, whether that's through your video presentation, your simulcast presentation, your program ads, flyers at the track. Once again, just going back to, it's not, so I get asked by a family member, if this horse retires, what happens to them? They know, and it's just kind of second nature to everybody who goes to the races.
So on that note, I think you all have a one-pager that you can put up that Eric and I talked about this. So we had a Zoom call before we convened and talked about the different things we would talk about. And I happened to be at Saratoga in 2023 for two of the most horrific incidents, and anybody who was there remembers them vividly. And it really took the wind out of everybody's sails when horses in high-profile races had catastrophic injuries right in front of the crowd. And so when that happens, you don't really know what to say, and you don't know how to react, and you don't have the stats readily available to tell people around you who don't understand horse racing that this is really a rare thing. And so I created what I called a one-pager that I felt like people, different racetracks, could put in their program, and they could shape it to fit their statistics and their state at their racetrack, however they want to do it. But you can see from this one-pager, and I think Robert's going to hand these out too for anybody who wants. This is the one that's been graphically enhanced by a friend of mine, and we presented it at the Horse Racing Women's Summit last summer. But just a one-pager that essentially gives you all those statistics that you don't readily have available in your back pocket when your friend who went to the track with you and has never been to the track just witnessed this says, like, how can you let this happen? And why does this happen? Because as we know, everybody in the room knows it's very, very rare, but I do feel like we need to be better equipped to handle these incidents at the time. And so many times, Naja, I think you could speak to this, the track doesn't even go on record as having any sort of a quote other than a quote from the AAEP vet on call, and I think we need to be more proactive and ready to respond.
Yeah, certainly so. I mean, it's crisis communication, and it's something that needs to be developed and make sure that we can implement at all racetracks across the industry so that when we're having questions from fans visiting the racetrack, I know the instances you talked about at Saratoga or anywhere else, that we're properly armed and we're communicating what we need to ensure that those fans are returning, and that we're also displaying that we're doing the best that we can for our prime athletes.
Yeah. So Jeff, before we move on to our next subject of technology and gambling, is there anything you want to add to that from Pennsylvania?
Just to second the sentiments up here. The Pennsylvania Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, we operate Turning for Home, our aftercare program at Parks Racetrack. We assess every owner $100 per start. Aftercare takes all of us. Whether you win or whether you run last, it's all of our responsibility. So we assess that $100 fee, which helps, promote our program, along with Parks Racing. They give us a generous donation every year. So it truly does take all of us. It takes a village from start to finish. And like I said, and many of you said up here, it's the license to operate. We're going to be judged on how these horses have their second career.
So to be clear, every time a horse is entered and starts in Pennsylvania, it's a $100 fee that goes directly toward aftercare?
$100 fee goes directly to aftercare, every horse in the race, and it goes right to Turning for Home. And like I said, we made that change about 2 years ago now. Very proud of that change. We jumped it up pretty significantly, but once COVID cleared and everything else, very proud of that. It's a lot of people judge horsemen's groups on what they do, and I think Turning for Home, at least for the PTHA, is what we can be most proud about.
Yeah, you should be proud of that. I wish every racetrack was doing that.
15 years now, we just surpassed 4,300 horses.
Wow.
So we're very proud, and many of my board of director members, not only currently but before us, along with our leadership groups, it truly did take a great team, and we're very excited about our past, but we're more excited about our future.
Congratulations. So this is a next-gen panel, and so even with the next-gen panel, as Sam mentioned, equine safety and welfare is right at the top of the agenda, but it wouldn't be a next-gen panel without technology. And so along with that, we're going to move on into technology, and Eric, I'm going to let you take the lead on this.
Yeah, technology is very broad, right? I feel like there's a million ways we could go with this, so trying to whittle it down was a bit of a challenge, I'd say, for the group, but I think we really focused on 3 main points. And safety was, of course, the biggest. Sam did a great job addressing many of the things HISA is doing and HIWU are doing to promote that, as well as many of the companies that we've talked about this morning. I was very impressed.
But the point is, too, relative to using the technology to make it more comprehensible.
Absolutely, because you're right, we can have the technology in place, but then it's how us as users can capitalize on that, whether that's, like I said, for safety, social media and tech is obviously a big part of, I'm sure, all of our lives, and will be ever expanding as we go along. And then finally, just making our processes easier. That's what this is all about at the end of the day, is making life easier. For crying out loud, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you couldn't place a bet without going to a place, and I could reach in my pocket right now and play whatever race they're on over at Parks where Jeff's at. So point being, it's something that we focus on, especially in our data science subcommittee, that I think we're really proud of the work we've done in a very short time. Our small group, we have a few horse players on that committee that have been excellent contributors actually in showing the technology that they use as customers and fans to promote the game, and then proposing those tools to people at HISA, HIWU, and maybe they can, just showing them how we use it, I should say, and then maybe they can develop strategies for their systems and their processes to make their lives easier. So it's just one way in which I think technology is really helping through our subcommittee.
And Eric, you work in the racing office. Are they using technology in the racing office to maybe better understand the horses they have stable on the grounds, which races they need to ride, how they're going to be able to fill those races? Have they been able to embrace technology to help with that?
Absolutely. And like every other industry, there's ways to go. I think that the systems that all tracks use, it's very comprehensive, very easy to understand once you understand it. I think that, and this kind of goes to a more general point, and goes back to the idea that you can put the technology out there, but then it's training people how to use it. So, right, the veterinarians that are using these HISA programs that Sam was referencing, right, you can put it in their face, but then how they can use that to capitalize, there's a lot of education that also has to go along with technology. So you spoke of the racing office. We have our systems, but you can have a coworker who isn't very tech savvy. They're from an older generation, and that's okay, but then it needs to be on the tracks to make sure they know what they're doing. Because if you know how to use it, it makes things more efficient. It makes things easier, and that's what technology is all about at the end of the day.
I think Lisa Lazarus had the best line a couple of years ago when she said, I think every flip phone in America is owned by a trainer.
Yeah, coming from the racing office, I can certainly attest.
So how do we use technology to help with gambling also? Naja, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we've seen the expansion of sports gambling, and it's a unique opportunity, and it's here to also grow our sport. We have to lower the entry-level barrier. I know sometimes it can be hard for a first-time visitor at the racetrack. We've all taken friends, if they're picking up a form or a post-parade for the first time, how comprehensive that can be. So I'm speaking to using our means to implement maybe fixed odds wagering. I know certain jurisdictions such as Monmouth has taken that in, or expanding that onto prop bets. Because as we've seen with sports gambling overall, anything that we can do, we have to develop pari-mutuel players, and I want to make that point explicitly clear. What we want to do is use entry points, though, to learn how to first implement and engage these new players, and then develop them into becoming pari-mutuel players. So you're not jumping in, I'll take friends to the racetrack and, hey, let me get your $20 and play this pick five. Okay. But I want you to develop you on your own. First, you can start with, if you're able to start with, what jockey's going to win the meet title at Santa Anita, at Saratoga? What trainer's going to win the trainer title? Now I have an vested interest every day of following along. Then maybe I'll grow to playing a pick 3, pick 4, pick 5. So I'd like to see us expand in those areas.
So I have a question for you, and I'm stealing from Dick Powell, who's on my next panel, the 50 ideas in 50 minutes. And one of the things that he's going to talk about in there is that our odds are difficult to understand. Like, we don't really explain very well, why does 3 to 1 pay $8 instead of $6? And what the hell is 3 to 5 and 7 to 2? Anyway, so could we just start with like making that a little bit, like, let's say that you bet $2, just say you get $8 back. Like, could we do that maybe?
Definitely, and I know Pat Cummings has been a big proponent of breakage and what's done with that. So certainly the opportunity is there, but we have to, if we're going to continue to grow our sport, we have to make sure that our gambling and wagering product is understandable to today's players that are also wagering on basketball, football, and other various sports out there.
Yeah. And Alexa, I think you have ideas for other ways to just sort of take the mystery out of it.
Sure, yeah, it's ironic for me to talk about this, given that, one, I'm not allowed to gamble in this job, and two, before I took this job, I'm terrible anyway. But from my experience is when I bring new people to the racetrack, you get a form, and it's a lot of jargon, it's a lot of gibberish, frankly, if you don't know what you're looking at. And even if you spend an hour explaining what the B means, or what, you know, the front wraps, or, you know, what the 2s mean in the PPs, there's a difference between reading it and understanding it.
Yeah.
And if it's your first time at the track and you like gambling but you don't know racing, I'm not sure why you would choose to spend hours trying to decipher PPs when you can bet on a sport that you already understand with the simple odds wagers that Naj just proposed. So we were actually talking separately, this is beyond my scope, of, you know, the ideas of, you know, maybe AI explaining what various things mean in PPs of, you know, is this horse a front runner? Will there be pace in the race, in this race? Something like that, if the rest of the group wants to expand, because I think it's intriguing.
Yeah, I think the big point when we chatted was simplification. Like, that just needs to be a key word in everyone's mind as we go forward and trying to expand our customer bases. We need to simplify as much as we can in order, because it's simple in every other sport. Everyone gets football, everyone gets basketball. It's simple concepts. So if we can develop something like an AI product where it's like, what is a win bet? Rather than have to go find the flyer on the side, you know, everyone's seen it at the racetrack. It's probably torn in half. It says, you know, here's what a win bet means, and you still don't understand it. They can all go to their phone now on the track's website or something. What is a win bet? And the AI system can explain it to them. So that's just one of a billion ways in which we can simplify the sport for the new customer, and then they can understand it, and we can continue to evolve and grow.
But then how would we get it to the customer? Would this be an app that each different racetrack would have to have, or would it be an app that, let's say, the Jockey Club would provide or Equibase would provide?
I mean, it could go either way. I mean, if a company like a Jockey Club or an Equibase could take that on, I think it'd be super helpful. But I mean, at the end of the day, I guarantee a good chunk of this room, and especially as we evolve, right, as everyone gets older, as we get older, everyone's going to have a cell phone. So we're going to be able to download apps. It's going to make sense to us as we go along. So putting the time and investment into products like that, whether that's at an organizational level or a racetrack level, it's going to benefit you in the long run. If a racetrack were to do it truthfully, their handle would grow instantaneously, because, at least on track, because they could understand the game and they'd be the first mover and everyone would follow.
And I think, Jeff, you've been a proponent for the fixed odds wagering, because that way when you bet at 6 to 1, and then one of the things that's the most disheartening is you bet at 6 to 1 and they leave the starting gate and your horse is 2 to 1.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for new gamblers. You know, it's tough to say the horse was going in the gate at X, came out at Y, and then they're trying to figure out, well, what happened there? So I think that would solve that problem. Additionally, I think the biggest thing, at least for our generation, the next gen generation, I think our average age is 31 years old up here, is the crossed professional sports realms. So if you could get fixed odds, there's no reason why a player of our age, they're always doing parlays. You hear about it day in and day out. They have a 10-leg parlay and they sweat it out for 3 straight days on it. So there's no reason why someone can't bet the Kentucky Derby winner with the World Series champion or the Super Bowl champion. I think that is where we're at. You always prioritize the horse player, but I think you need to look at point of contact and point of entry, meaning if you have a sports bettor, a younger generation sports bettor, who is engaged that way and is experienced that way to say, hey, I'm going to throw a couple dollars on a future for the Kentucky Derby with my Super Bowl bet. I think just getting that point of entry, that point of contact, then you can kind of garnish them and groom them into more of an everyday horse player. But I think it starts with that, you know, that introduction, and I think fixed odds would give us a way to kind of groom that into existence.
I think I need a moment of confession here, because earlier I was asked to do an interview with Contessa from CNBC, and where she was going with this was, look, we've got, you know, sports wagering now, and horse racing are often on that same platform. What are the opportunities that we have in 2025 that we didn't have in 2024? And because we talked about all this in advance and I had these notes, I said, well, how about if in 2025 a sports player could have the opportunity to bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Kentucky Derby that year? I don't know where I got that idea from, Jeff, but if you hear it on CNBC, take full credit, because it came from you. Sam, I think you also had some ideas about this.
Yeah, I had a couple of quick comments. This is, you know, it's outside of my scope with HISA, and like Alexa, I can't bet either, but I do think it's intimidating to go to the track for the first time. You're presented with a lot of information. There's a lot to digest. I could see real value in a simpler version of that. I know when I go to the track with people who go just once or twice a year, they just come up and ask me all of the questions, and then we'll go again the next year and they'll ask me all the same questions. So I think that there's value in having a simpler version. To Jeff's point, I like the idea of having, you know, creative bets that sort of the sports gambler may understand a little better. Prop bets. You know, in some of the other professional sports, you could bet that, you know, Joe Burrow is going to throw for more passing yards than Dak Prescott. Well, why can't you have a bet that this horse is going to finish ahead of this horse in a race? Or, you know, maybe there's an over/under on the first half mile in a race, or the full amount of the
or
race.
how many races Erat Ortiz is going to win today.
Yeah. I mean, so I think just being creative, because I do, you know, we can all see that as sports gambling in spans, right? That people are going to, as Alexa mentioned earlier, they know that a little better, and they're probably going to latch onto that. So finding creative ways to attract those bettors to the sport, I think is something to look into in the future.
So I think one of the things you mentioned, if I understood it correctly, was adding like maybe a percentage level to it. Like this horse at 8 to 5 has a 90% chance of winning. Is there a possibility to be able to do something like that to sort of bridge the gap between odds and percentage of winning, or likelihood of winning?
In Australia, they have something called fractional wagering, where basically you can take the risk of 50% of what you would win if you put the full wager. So if a horse is 5 to 1, and I put $5 on them at 50%, then I'll get them at, you know, 5 to 2 essentially. Once again, I hope I'm explaining that correctly. I learned that here at the RTIP, so thank you, Robert and Phil O'Hara. But in all seriousness, so along those lines, yes, right, and that can mitigate the risk for those newer customers that don't want to, you know, want to make money but want to do it in an easier way. That way, you're not so scared as you do it for the first time. So along those lines, yes, that could be great for the new customer.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to add anything about the gambling possibilities or technology before we move on? All right, so our next subject is outreach, and really through the story of horses. So we're always talking about how to reach the customers, and, you know, how do we get out there, and we talk about social media and influencers, but one of the things that we really don't physically share with our customer base or potential customer base is the horse themselves. So Alexa, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I was your typical horse crazy girl who never grew up out of it. I still am one as an adult. And my mantra generally is that there's nobody who doesn't like horses. There are people who might not like dogs or might not like cats. I've never met anybody who doesn't like a horse. And just in my experience of when you bring people to the track who've never gone before, they want to be around the horses all the time, either outside the paddock, in the paddock, at the rail, that they're just infectious. I don't think I'm saying anything that nobody knows here. I think it's pretty common knowledge, at least to this room. But from my experience, if you get people close to horses, I mean, that's one thing that we have that other professional sports do not have, is that animal element. And I think from my end as someone who grew up riding, and now when I'm at the barn, I'd say generally those who are riding, they're teens, late teens, early 20s, and their only association with horse racing for the most part are the ex-race horses who are in the barn as lesson horses or sale horses, or they're leasing them. They don't know a whole lot, and I think that they already have the attachment, attraction toward horses, and if you bring them to a different equestrian sport, which is essentially what horse racing is, that it should be an easier sell for them than others, respectively speaking, because they already have that in and knowledge of horses, and I think it provides an opportunity from a job perspective, from a potential, education perspective of just wanting to be involved. I mean, if I'm bringing teenagers to the track, they might not be betting yet, but it can turn into that in a few years. But the more immediate is just wanting to be involved in the industry in some capacity. I think there are plenty of, young adults who I've been around who they think that they want to be a groom or they want to work on the show circuit, but horse racing is just as valid. They just don't know enough about it to take that leap.
Well, what about just the fans, too? Just being able, like, Naja, you've had probably more experience than anybody, especially at NYRA, because you've been in so many different departments there. Is there the possibility that you could work with a trainer, like, let's say, a Todd Pletcher or Garrett Contessa, who's always quite open to say, like, look, every Wednesday at 10 a.m., anybody who wants to, like, is that an insurance liability? Is that something that's a possibility? What are your thoughts?
Always a liability risk, but I think working with certain trainers, as you mentioned, Gary or Rick Schosberg has always been a proponent of making sure that we're giving access. Ken McPeak in the luncheon today talked about the access that he gave to Torpedo Anna, opening up, making sure everybody can come to training.
But he did give access, but they needed to be able to get on the backside first, and most
Correct.
people can't get in the back gate.
That is true, that is true. There are certain instances, such as when you show up for training at Saratoga, and I know it's not as close as going to the barn itself, but we do have the regulators, so we want to ensure that we don't have too much access. So there is a fine line. Yeah. And I also want to speak to points that everybody has made here today. I think horse racing, we also have to work on our nomenclature. I prefer rehomed rather than rescued.
Yeah.
I prefer second career rather than aftercare.
Yeah.
Just baby races. I know that's always been something that's always been talked about.
And also the braking process.
Correct.
I'd rather see the starting process.
Correct.
Yeah.
Crop versus whip.
Yeah.
These are all things that are always going to contribute to our social license, but as well as we just talked about, we have to find ways to get that exposure, get people up close to see these horses, and because they're going to fall in love with them. We know that.
And I think you've worked with Amplify Racing some
Yes.
to try to encourage this.
Correct. I wanted to talk about Amplify Horse Racing, which is an organization that's taken on the task of being the national youth arm for horse racing. They've had an outreach since being founded in 2020 of reaching over 28,000 individuals interested in the sport of horse racing, from the youngest of ages to whether they want to pursue careers in the industry, whether it's adolescents or college students. So a great organization for racetracks and jurisdictions to work with. And I know Jeff in Pennsylvania has also been working with Amplify, can speak to their progress as well.
Yeah, no, we're just actually turning the page, getting into Amplify. We kind of got the idea, Don Johnson, who's one of their board members, brought it to us. He's a local Ben Salem guy. But at Parks right now, currently we have a Delaware Valley University Day. And Del Val is one of the largest programs in the state of Pennsylvania that has an equine studies program. So we give out 5 scholarships. We've done it 3 years in a row now. That number has grown from about 35 students the first year. This year we had about 70. So it's doubled in 3 years.
In
and
3 years, wow.
It's a great opportunity to show the students, especially those in Pennsylvania, that, hey, you can go work on a breeding farm, you can do X, Y, and Z, but right in your backyard you have Parks Racing, and you can come and you can make a career, whether they want to be veterinarians, blacksmiths, trainers, you name it. We just want to give them the opportunity, and so many people, you don't realize it until you get them to come out to the track, and you just literally see their eyes just open at the endless possibilities, because yes, they're taught about equine and they're taught about thoroughbreds and everything in the classroom, but to see it firsthand up against the rail and see their first horse race, it's like, you know, the sky's the limit. So it's very rewarding to put on that program. We put that on in conjunction with Parks Racing, so it's a Horsemen and racetrack co-collaboration.
And Naja, I'd like for you to talk about the collaboration with NYRA and the Ed Brown Society that was recently announced through a press release of NYRA's.
Yes, Ed Brown Society is another nonprofit organization, and they're working to identify students from various backgrounds and diversity, bringing that into the industry, finding them opportunities to be placed across the industry so we can have that implementation in various roles. Because we've all talked about expanding our sport, expanding horse racing. We've got to reach out to everybody. We've got to make sure that we're inclusive.
Yeah. And Eric, when we talked, you said like you're at Prairie Meadows and there's this school right behind Prairie Meadows and none of these kids have ever been to the track. So what sort of things can they do to introduce the kids to the horses?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to make a point about Amplify. I was a part of the first group of mentees, Anise Montpleasure, who I commend for all of her great work through this organization. I was part of the first group. I didn't necessarily go down the road that my mentee was. He was a trainer, but it's still, that connection's so valuable, and I'm sure so many other people have done it. You do the same, and just the expansion of programs like that, it's going to be life-changing for so many people. But yeah, it's just, at the end of the day, like Alexa said, it's all about exposure and getting people at the racetrack. You know, like you said, there's an elementary school right around the corner, and I always wonder, how many of these kids have come to the track? You know, are there opportunities at any track that's close to not just an elementary school, but local universities, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, to get these young people involved? Because Alexa, you know, you just put it so eloquently that if you see the horses, you're going to fall in love with them. I did. I'm sure most of you did. I'm sure everyone out there can say the same. So it's just important. One more example, I was chatting with a few new RTIP students even, and their exposure was through off-track thoroughbreds, working at local farms and stuff, and they said, you know, I heard about that and I knew they had done that. I did more research on racing and I fell in love with it, and I want to learn more about this. So it's just expanding these opportunities is essential at the racetrack, the organizational level, and the individual level. You know, being good Samaritans and spreading the good word about racing, it'll take us a very long way and sustain us a very long way.
Well, I think we all would admit that Keeneland has a really good reputation, not just in the horse racing world, but in the Lexington community, which isn't always the case with the racetrack and their community. And one of the things that I know they've done for, I don't know how many years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, is it's just sort of a rite of passage for the fifth graders in the area to do a field trip to Keeneland. And I'm not sure what time of year they do that, but maybe you could start to implement something like that where you are, Jeff, where you are in Pennsylvania, different racetracks. Because I think that at the end of the day, you've got those kids who are looking at the horses and they're at a track and they're like, oh, there's horses there. How do I get there? My parents don't go to the races, and so I don't. So I think the field trips give them an opportunity to sort of take a peek behind the curtain and find out ways that maybe they could work with horses.
Absolutely.
So Sam, I think also you had some thoughts about the interactions with the jockeys or the trainers, maybe via social media.
Yeah, listen, I agree with everybody. I'm a firm believer that if you can get somebody to the track, they'll be hooked, because, you know, just like Eric said, it happened to me. And so it's, you know, how do we get them there? What are other ways to draw them to the track? You know, the celebrities of our game are, you know, the jockeys, the horses, the trainers, et cetera. You know, how can we be creative to develop interactions with the fans and those individuals? You know, I had a point about social media, you know, leveraging influencers and using, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but social media platforms like TikTok. But I read a story that there was a horse racing group in Ireland, I believe, that leveraged WhatsApp and TikTok to really tell some of the behind-the-scenes stories, interview trainers, interview owners, interview jockeys. And they had a year-over-year increase of 5% of 18 to 34-year-olds that attended the races. So a pretty significant increase. And so maybe there's opportunities there, people who are far smarter than me when it comes to social media, but maybe there's opportunities to tap into that.
I was in Ireland in September at the Curragh, and I just happened to be walking by as this little guy who was about 10 years old in little Gucci loafers with his microphone was interviewing one of the jockeys, and I was like, what is happening here? And I took a picture of it because, yeah, stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
if kids who are wanting to get into journalism could come to the racetrack and actually interview the jockeys and trainers, how exciting would that be? Yeah. Okay, so now, on that note, increasing our fan base and widening the viewership, Jeff, I'd like for you to take the lead on this because you guys in Pennsylvania have formed a pretty powerful partnership with the NBC affiliate there in Philadelphia. So can you talk about what you're doing there?
Absolutely. We look at it two ways, the internal platform and the external platform. The internal platform being FanDuel, horse races now, all of the general horse racing avenues that horse players, owners, trainers are used to going to. And then an external platform is something where the TV might be on and people might not be expecting to see it, but they're going to see it. So at the PTHA, we partnered with NBC Sports Philadelphia. We run a weekly television show called Let's Go Racing. It's every Saturday morning. We run 52 weeks a year. We have 51 regular episodes, the 52nd. We replay a Smarty Jones documentary, which always gets, never gets old. It's endless. But we just feel like being on that platform with the other major sports, especially in Philadelphia, when you have the Eagles, the Sixers, the Phillies, the Flyers, just being on that platform gives us instant credibility, and it also gives us a chance, like we talked about earlier, that point of entry, point of contact. When people go on FanDuel, they're expecting to see horse racing, but yet if you're someone in the Bucks County, Philadelphia area, and you have NBC Sports Philadelphia on, and you happen to catch horse racing, A, it reminds them that there's horse racing in our backyard still, they can come out to the track. B, it keeps them up to date with what we're doing. And C, we continuously promote Pennsylvania Derby there. So Pennsylvania Derby is 364 days a year. We are constantly just building up to that moment of Pennsylvania Derby. So we want to keep it relevant, and we want to keep it in the minds of all the people in the Bucks County area.
I would think it would also keep the staff on their toes to trying to keep creating new events, new opportunities, because we've got to go on the show next week and talk about what we're doing, and we can't talk about the same thing we talked about last week.
For sure, and we're very lucky enough. We have Hall of Fame sports writer Dick Girardi, who's been a part of our show for many, many years. So him and Bruce Casella do a tremendous job keeping things relevant, keeping the fans excited about what we're doing, because like I said, if we're to be viewed as a major league sport, which I firmly believe we are, we need to act like one. And being on that platform, seeing that NBC Sports logo in the top right gives us that instant credibility. Second to that, not only did we have a show, but we had a Smarty Jones Day live broadcast. So if you were watching our show every Saturday, you then had the opportunity to watch our Smarty Jones Day live broadcast, which was a prep for our Pennsylvania Derby Day, and then hence Pennsylvania Derby Day was also on NBC Sports Philadelphia. So it's just grooming that everyday fan to know that A, horse racing is still relevant, and B, you can catch it right here in your backyard.
But you have refused to brag on your fruits of your labor because didn't you have the largest turnout for Pennsylvania?
Yeah, largest turnout since 2000 in the last 10 years. So the last time we had a crowd this large was California Chrome, and obviously, he brought a crowd of his own. But it's our largest crowd since 2014. So again, a lot of things we are doing. There might not be one perfect solution to increase visibility and create popularity, but I think at least we at the PTHA, and I know our Next Gen committee, we're willing to throw a lot of ideas at the wall and continuously do it, because there might not be one perfect formula, but I think together, you just keep the wheels moving.
Well, when we all talked on the Zoom, you gave accolades to First Racing and what they did with California Crown Day, and so they tried something different, they did something different, and I think that's what everybody's trying to do, is learn from each other and then also sort of help instruct one another.
For sure, that event space, especially with our generation, it's that event space. You have to build the excitement. You have to make something that's normal seem extraordinary, and I think making those things like California Chrome Day, Breeders' Cup Day, I'd like to brag Pennsylvania Derby Day, it's making it feel extraordinary to where if the average fan is at home, no matter what age they are, this is a can't miss event, and by you not going to it, you're missing out on it. And I think making those events, whether you have bands, whether you have, beer gardens, whatever the case may be, you have to make it an experience first, because like you mentioned before, everyone that comes out to the track loves it, but you might not get them there just on horse racing. You might have to get them there on an enhanced experience.
Well, you in Pennsylvania, just like in New York, you have a huge sports fan base. And so how are you trying to work with the crossover promotions with pro athletes and other sports?
We're going to a lot of the games. Like a lot of the games, we're trying to implement marketing strategies. So when they run ads and stuff, we're trying to get our PTHA logo up there, our Parks Racing logo up there. We're trying to go with their hosts. So on NBC Sports Philadelphia, when they do a pre-Phillies game or a post-Phillies game or Eagles game, et cetera, we're trying to kind of break into that market a little bit. So we've reached out to the hosts on those shows, kind of sent them a care package, say, hey, We'd love to do some work with you. So we've actually had some podcasts with them. And again, it's just kind of grooming that audience. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I think in the long run, if we can just get more aligned with that, we might not be treated like the Phillies or the Eagles or the Flyers or the Sixers, but I think if we're in the same ballpark of them, I think that's a win on all accounts.
And Naja, you're in the same parking lot as the Islanders. Right now, a construction zone, but eventually you'll have Belmont Park again, right next to the Islander Stadium. And how are you leveraging that sort of partnership?
Just what Jeff mentioned, it's about building that synergy. There is a 24-hour Long Island train center, so as fans come in, we have banners up featuring jockeys, featuring the horses, letting every visitor know if you're there for Islander the game that you're on hallowed ground, you're at Belmont Park. There is a hockey arena there, and we love the partnership with the Islanders because we've been able to build a lot of cross promotion and, of course, promoting horse racing and the return of Belmont Park, which will be beautiful, but also ensuring that, every visitor that you are visiting a historic place and a historic venue, and that's the opportunity to see your Islanders tonight, but come back and watch horse racing as well.
Yeah, you know how to get here now, so
Yes.
come back. So as we move on, or before we move on to the next subject, did anybody else want to weigh in on any of that?
I'll just echo Jeff's point about it doesn't just need to be horse racing to get you to the track. I mean, that's why most of us go at the end of the day, but just, not every track apron needs to be a slab of concrete and some tables. Get creative, find new ways. It doesn't all have to work. It doesn't all have to be costly. One quick example, I interned at NYRA a handful of years ago. It was a very dead Thursday, not much going on. Not a stellar card by any means, but there was one area of the track that was packed. It was this little area at the top of the stretch with 5 or 6 grills and picnic table setups, and people were clearly just having a good time. So it doesn't need to be the biggest day. Just give the opportunity for people to come, emphasize community, and there'll be some horse racing too, and I'm sure they'll bet because once you get there, people tend to like to bet.
Yeah, and I think the area you just talked about also emphasizes having different price level options, because like NYRA really they lean into that backyard that they have, and having those different price points allows you to bring more people to the track.
100%, yeah. I mean, Saratoga, it's not too expensive to go. I mean, obviously you'll fill up your coolers with everything you need to fill it up with and have a good time, but at the end of the day, that's a perfect example of community work. You just have to develop it and get creative with it.
Yeah.
And sorry, to follow up, leaning on our strengths, Kentucky Derby Day. No matter your jurisdiction, no matter your state, everybody wants to watch horse racing on Kentucky Derby Day. Those are big college days. Those are big opportunities for everybody, no matter where you're at, to get new fans in the building, to get exposure to the sport.
Yeah, and it's nice to do together. I mean, you can watch it from your living room, but it's more fun to do with your friends, even if it's at the track in New York instead of Kentucky. So this sport isn't going to exist without new talent. So, as the older generation dies off, we have to have younger generation coming in. And so constantly, this is what the RTIP program does, developing guys like Eric and Alexa. And so how do we continue with that, developing new talent? And Naja, I'd like for you to talk about this because I think you've leaned into mentorship programs.
Definitely, and as you just mentioned, Donna, the RTIP program, the equine program at Louisville, various outlets, Amplified Horse Racing, Ed Brown. We have to work on our mentorship and sustainability and identifying not just ourselves as the next generation, but the next generation that will continue to lead our sport and move us going forward.
Alexa, I think you have some thoughts on this also.
Sure, yeah, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and speaking of mentorship, I'm going to embarrass Mary for a minute, so I'm sorry. But for those who don't know, I had been a fan of horse racing since I was 10, but I connected with Dr. Mary Scolay in high school when I was 16. I was in a high school science research program, and the other students wanted to cure cancer and diabetes and dementia, and I wanted to look at how do you reduce the risk of horses getting hurt, essentially. So I wrote a cold email to her, and she wrote me this really thorough, thoughtful response, and she helped me for a year with collecting data for my project. And that kept going from the time I was 16 years old in terms of being a reference for me, a mentor to me, keeping in touch through all of the years. She put a good word in for me, which resulted in an internship at the Jockey Club, which became a full-time job. And I now work with her every day at HIWU, as she's the chief of science, and I'm the director of communications.
Mary, are you here? I can't see because of the light. Thank you. Mary, stand up. Stand up. before I let you go on, I think that speaks to a greater point in that everybody in this room, if you have ever made a living from horse racing and you don't think of yourself as an ambassador for horse racing and you don't want to help that next generation come in, go, leave. Because there's no room for that. We all have to help, and Mary was a perfect example of that, and Alexa might not be here if not for that relationship.
Yeah, I think for sure, because I think that Amplify has been great at opening those doors. Amplify didn't exist for us 10, 15 years ago, and I am an Amplify mentor. I've been a mentor twice. It's extremely important to me to pay it forward. So, you know, I'm very passionate about if someone reaches out to you, that you respond to their email or you respond to their phone call, and you don't just pass it on to HR of, oh, they're interested in a job, it's not my problem. Please just talk to people and give them a chance. And I think Symposium's certainly a great outlet for current RTIP students, that, you know, there's no better opportunity to interact with them, and that if they come up to you, please engage with them and serve as a resource for them, because to your point, I don't know that I would have gotten the jobs that I've gotten and the opportunities that I would have gotten if it wasn't for Mary responding to my email, and I still have the email. It's in my folder 15 years later, so.
Well, one of the things we also talked about is that it's one thing to introduce somebody into horse racing and say, hey, I can get you connected with this, I can get you this internship, I can get you a spot here or there, but those are very low-level jobs typically, and burnout creeps in pretty quickly. And I think you kind of need to have that mentorship relationship as a lifeline to know that you're going to be able to eventually move up, right?
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's another area I'm passionate about, of it's nurturing those relationships, it's developing talent. I think that sometimes, to be blunt, it can feel like the only reason racing tries to, the only method, I guess, that's used to retain young talent in racing is, well, they're passionate about it, so that's why they'll stay. And that's not sustainable.
Everybody's
long-term.
passionate when they get married. That doesn't mean it lasts.
Yeah. So I think that in terms of
Write that one down.
That's good.
in terms of making young talent want to stay in this industry, I've talked about it with a few people of, you know, when we were younger, I remember I had an internship at NYRA, and it was unbelievable to me that I was being paid to watch racing all day. I was doing other things, but I'd say for the first few weeks of the internship, my day would be done before the last post. I would always stay until the last race, because it was unreal that I was having the opportunity that I'm being paid money to be, while, you know, next to horses running in a circle. But that doesn't last you 50 years.
Yeah, and I think people who work in the sport start to take all this for granted. Like, who cares about watching the last race when you could leave right now, right? And for you, it was a thrilling thing. I'm getting paid to stay here off duty to watch this. Naja, one of the things we talked about when we all met is that the other thing is that introducing young people and bringing them in is they have an opportunity to see how many different areas. It's not just the backside, it's not just administration, it's not just the racing office, it's not just the C-suites. So how do you make sure that they see every different sort of element that they could touch?
Definitely in New York with our human resources team, we've kind of taken on a new onboarding process. We're exposing new hires to different areas throughout the company just to see the expansion of the television product. The America's Day at the Races, a daily program that's showing races day to day. The TV department on its own beast with so many opportunities for growth, so many entry points and pathways, front side and backside opportunities. Of course, with the expansion of regulatory, implementation, there's going to be more jobs there, liaisons between horsemen and owners, so various opportunities, and we got to work better within each of our various states and making sure that everybody's getting exposure to every little area, because I worked in the press office for 7 years, and I sweated out every time I had to write a recap. It was not my most favorite thing, but I got to get that opportunity and then move on to HR, and then move on to marketing, and then find my niche here right now with the breeding program, and that's been a phenomenal experience. So it's not pigeonholing somebody's career, but allowing them to grow, and I know, Eric, you've been able to be fortunate enough to get various opportunities at various racetracks as well.
Yeah, no, I have not been in the industry very long, but I feel like I've done just about everything I can at this point. I started wanting to work hands-on with horses. In high school, I worked at farms for free. I got paid in like coffee half the time, but that's how much I cared. But then, I worked on the backside for Ray Handel up in New York for a summer. I worked for Eliza Hendricks at the Wanamaker's at the time, now English Digital USA. I transitioned over to the racing office, but just because I interned in racing offices didn't mean I was in the racing office every day. I saw marketing, I saw mutuals, I saw how different 8 tracks that, had their own ADWs operated. So that when you get that talent in, expose them to everything, make them versatile, because every single person on this stage is versatile, right? Every single person in our group, our next generation group, is versatile. They can do amazing things that aren't just within their roles. And that's also going to help with burnout, truthfully, because you're not just going to get stuck in the same routine every day, logging into the same computer to do the same task every day. Keeping them on their toes in their first few years of development, it'll be crucial to them staying bright about the sport and the industry they work in.
Yeah, Eric, you were clearly one of those young talent people that we brought along, and I'm glad that it worked out. I'm glad we have you in our sport. We're lucky to have you. But the other thing that we have to do is improve the fan experience. And it's one thing to get people to the racetrack, but if they're in dilapidated facilities and aged bathrooms and all that, it's not going to work. Very few racetracks are able to be Keeneland, Churchill Downs, Belmont, and the innovative tracks that are tearing down old buildings or renovating the buildings that they have. And so, Alexa, your thoughts on trying to improve that fan experience?
Yeah, so before I ended up in the fortunate situations that more often than not, when I get to go to the big race events, I'm doing it in a work capacity, so I get additional access. My mom has been my longtime racetrack buddy, and when we go to the track, we sit in the grandstand. I don't think we've sat in the clubhouse for years in terms of we've had paid seats. So our experience is really what most people experience, those who are probably more likely to be your first-time visitors. And the reality is that I've been in a lot of bathrooms at the racetrack and the grandstand areas that would not work in any other professional sports venue. They're just, you have Fenway, you have Wrigley, you have Saratoga. Those facilities can get away with being old. The rest cannot. Maybe there's a few others that I'm missing. And I've been in the nice areas that do have nice bathrooms, that do have great food options, but, I've definitely been at the track with people who it's their first time, and I kind of just direct them away from areas that I don't really want them to see, not because they're unsafe, but just they're unattractive to look at.
Well, and I think Saratoga gets away with being old because it's beautiful and it's historic, and the bathrooms are clean, and the facility is clean, and you walk up to the bar, and the bar is modern, and all the amenities are sort of modern. But I also think we could improve the fan experience with some sort of, I don't know, again, does it go back to every racetrack has to have their own app? But it's just like when you go to the airport and you're in the Atlanta airport for 3 hours, or you're in the Phoenix airport for 2 hours and you're starving, and you can go over to the interactive map and you can see where can I eat lunch and where is it and how far is it from my gate. And so I feel like if we could get interactive maps at racetracks, whether it's on the phone or at the track itself, it could help the fan experience.
And I feel like, I'm a big sports fan outside of horse racing, that I'm a big Yankee fan, and it's a question that comes up not infrequently with me when comparing Yankee Stadium versus Citi Field in terms of the experience and the food, and I hate to say it, I think Citi Field is better. But those are conversations that I feel like we should be having more often. I know that there are certain tracks that are known for certain foods and things, but in general, it just isn't. It's not really what tracks are known for.
Yeah.
And I think of, Citi Field is known for really upscale food. A lot of professional sports venues, their experience is just as important as the actual event that's being put on, the reason and theory that people are there. Yeah. So that's been an observation.
I like your interactive fan experience idea. We were talking about this earlier. I mean, if you were to go for a full card of racing, you're there, 6-7 hours? And there's live racing for maybe 10 to 12 to 15 minutes throughout that day. So keeping the fans engaged and having a good experience during that downtime, I think, is critical.
Yeah, and we all know how to get around Saratoga really well, but if you're a new person to Saratoga, you don't even know there's a carousel. Like, you would have no idea if you just came in one of the front gates. And so, yes, just to let people know that there's other things out there, or the playgrounds for the kids, or that you could see the jockeys as they walk by. Yeah. So, yeah, just things like that. Okay, so we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. I'd really like for you to keep any questions that you ask specific to today's topics that this panel has discussed. So if anybody would like to ask any questions, there's microphones on both sides. Any questions? Wow, you guys did a really good job of telling everybody everything they needed to know about the next gen. All right, well, thank you all for joining. Oh, wait, we have one question.
Oh my gosh,
Hold on.
Mackenzie.
Yes.
Being in the Next Gen committee, as a co-chair, I would just like to take this moment to encourage the audience. Like, these are your fresh, bright, new minds that are going to take over the industry. Pick their brains, like ask them questions. They're here, they're resources.
Yeah, you don't even have to just pick their brains. You could walk up to the microphone with a complaint about, like, look, this is something I've been seeing for the last 30 years, and since you all are the next gen, could you please try to fix this? Are you walking to the microphone?
Yes, I'm walking to the microphone.
Yes.
Yeah. My name's Richard Earhart. I'm a retired assistant superintendent of schools. I'd be very interested to hear a little more about Amplify.
Oh, great. I think Naja or?
Yeah, definitely. I will connect you with Denise Montpleasure, who is their executive director, and she's here at the symposium.
I had breakfast with her this morning, just quite by accident.
Oh,
So
phenomenal.
why-
But yes,
and that's why I'm asking.
Yes, Amplify Horse Racing, phenomenal organization, really going to be and is the national youth arm for our industry and making sure we're getting that development from the youngest of ages to adolescents to collegiate students and really adults as well, interested in working in horse racing and every aspect of the industry.
Did you have a question also? Yes.
Thank you guys for just also being the next generation and having this event on the schedule today. I really was looking forward to this. When you mentioned earlier about California Chrome bringing out that huge crowd at Parks, obviously in 2014, something that I've always wondered about is as a kid is I remember Zenyatta, and that really got me into the game. My dad was a racehorse trainer at Kent Molinaro for about 30 years in California. But Zenyatta really got me into the game in 2009, obviously winning the Breeders' Cup Classic. But I think we need more of that as far as getting younger fans into the game, as far as being able to follow horses. And obviously, with social media now, they can follow on their phones and they can see horses. But obviously, in this day and age with, the breeding sales and things like that, it's more on the edge of they're focusing on breeding and trying to sell a horse for the breeding shed rather than the racetrack. You know what I mean? And back then, obviously, Secretariat, he ran at 4, right? Well, a horse, a Secretariat like him that won the Belmont by 31 lengths, a horse like that nowadays would probably immediately retire right after that race because he's worth so much as a stallion, which makes so much sense, economic sense, right? So I just wonder if you guys have any thoughts at how can we kind of obviously keep those horses around longer to kind of allow fan bases to hold on to them and kind of be stars in our game, because I think the more stars we have, look at Steph Curry, Tom Brady, people are able to follow those sports, they gain a lot of notoriety, not just for that one person, but it helps out the entire sport itself if we have more athletes to follow.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Luckily in Pennsylvania we have Smarty Jones, so 20 years later I can still kind of use that once in a while, and it's pretty effective still, but you're 100% right. Zenyatta, those horses, I think the panel previous to us with Todd mentioning that Fierceness is coming back for another year. I think that's huge. I think if we can have more trainers, now that we have these lucrative purses that horses stick around for another year or two, I think this is a good opportunity to bring up the National Thoroughbred League. They visited Parks on October 19th. I know Bob Doherty's in the audience somewhere. That's sort of building the team around a racehorse. So even if a horse doesn't maybe go on to run at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, but maybe you have a team that's associated with it. I know the National Thoroughbred League is big on bringing professional athletes to thoroughbred racing, so maybe we can get fans to associate with a professional athlete who might own the Philadelphia Stallions or the Baltimore Colts, etc. So I think that might kind of bridge the gap a little bit when we do have an early retirement, if we can kind of get those fans engaged to a team ownership standpoint or even a trainer standpoint, whatever the case may be. But hopefully these purses continue to get more and more lucrative for these older, these older classic type horses to let horses stick around for the Pegasus or, go over to Dubai or Saudi Arabia or whatever the case may be. But you're absolutely right. Once people start to fall in love with a horse, the next thing you know, it's retired. But again, luckily, I think we have 3. Todd said he's bringing 3 back for next year, so that's a great start. And we need more.
And the Derby and Oaks winner.
Yeah. We need more Zenyatas and we need more Smarty Joneses. And I think every owner and trainer in the industry is hoping and praying that we have them just as much as we do. So
Yeah, we need to.
Can I add one more thing to that? I think that the Jockey Club's heart was in the right place when they tried to limit the amount of matings to 140. And I think that that would have been helpful in keeping stallions, potential stallions around longer, because if they can breed 250 mares, there's an awful lot of money in that, right? I think 140 wasn't maybe the right number. I think it needs to be somewhere between 140 and 200, maybe more like 170. But I do think that if there is a cap, and if they're able to hold them to that in the industry, a cap on the number of mares bred, then it's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to encourage them to stay around and race a little bit longer. And the other thing is I think that we're diluting the breed by having, you know, a certain number of stallions who can cover 250 mares a year. So I think it strengthens the breed, and it incentivizes those stallions to stay around a little longer. So hopefully the Jockey Club can take another run at that with a different number and get group buy-in on that, because I think it would be helpful. Any other thoughts?
You briefly mentioned social media, and obviously we talked about it a little bit here, but a few great examples just in this past year alone. What Ken McPeak did with Torpedo Anna and promoting her through his social media outlets was extraordinary. He created a brand around her that's exceptional, selling and giving away merch. Especially, he did a giveaway to young girls and women only at a track of hats, and I'm sure he gave them all away, in posting videos and telling the public when these horses are working out. That wasn't something that he had to do, and if he didn't do, more importantly, she would just be a run-of-the-mill, you know, future Eclipse champion with the Oaks and a Breeders' Cup win. But he created a brand, and honestly, it doesn't even need to be a horse that's earned millions of dollars and is worth millions of dollars that you create that brand around. Connecting it back to just the real world, people become sensations overnight, and it's just about how they brand themselves. So if you have some iron horse on your backside who, you know, he can be a nickel claimer, but if you create a compelling case around him or his trainer or his jockey or his exercise rider, people are going to fall in love with them. And that's really how we can more naturally grow the game. You know, obviously these superstars are great, and we're lucky that so many of them are planning to come back next year. But it doesn't just have to be those horses. It's just all about how you brand and craft the narrative around them. And that's really key, in my opinion at least, to the future success and getting people engaged in the game that otherwise would have no idea about.
And then getting the story out there. Like Kenny McPeak did a great job with that, so I don't know if every trainer is going to be able to do that or take the time to do that, but if they could, just try to get the story out there more. It's helpful.
And even just at the track level, the organizational level, once again, swing back, everyone has the power to do that through your social media accounts, your Instagrams, your Twitters, your TikToks, your X's. My apologies to Elon Musk and then, you know, your TikToks. But the point being, we all have the power to do it. There's plenty of brands out there that have the following already, at least by numbers, to do it.
I think too, just another thing I wanted to add is, like, that was a really good idea. I don't know who said it, but about maybe getting owners, and especially high-profile owners at racetracks, to maybe kind of understand, or get them to understand and how engaging that can be for a fan. And just like you're saying, I think for smaller tracks too as well on their social media, like I work, I do the social media, and also I'm a race analyst at the Pleasanton Golden State Racing Meet in Northern California. And so I kind of totally relate to that, and I'm trying to get people to, you know, follow a horse. This horse won back-to-back wins. He has a very bright future ahead of him. Try to get to him to connect. But I think, as my point earlier too, is that the higher profile horses, I think that also gets fans out to the track, so they see the high profile, the articles about Torpedo Anna, the great job Kenny McPeak does do at getting her word out and showing his daily life, his daily job. I think that will get them to the track, and then they'll become a fan of that horse that they do see that day at the track. So I think that's very important as well. But thank you. I loved all your answers. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate your questions. So I think we'll, wait, one more question? Yes.
Are you out of time?
No, we have a couple of minutes left. Thank you.
So mine's not a question, it's more a comment, and I'll try to make it brief. I'm Janet Van Bever with the American Quarter Horse Association, and we have a program called the Youth Racing Experience that we started back in 1998. In fact, I'm really proud of Anise because she participated in the program and then has taken that concept and grown it exponentially. And that's my word of encouragement today. Kudos to all of you for what you're doing. I applaud you both individually and corporately. And I'd also like to encourage all of us to take the platforms that we have and look at how we expand them. What we do at AQHA with our youth racing experience for the last couple of years, we've invited Robert's students from our tip, to come and shadow our program. So we're broadening the footprint of the impact. Just since I've been here, I've spoken to Jen Durenberg about crafting a program that emulates the experience, but designed for young veterinarians, because that's another great need in our industry. So my point is, and my encouragement is, take what we're doing and think about how you can broaden the impact so that your footprint expands. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for that.
Hi, I love what you guys are talking about, and I love what you guys are talking about. There's no better way I can explain this, because one of the biggest challenges I noticed currently currently that wasn't available in the past is that horse racing is not as accessible. You know, it's not easily accessible. Like how do I tell you this? It really costs more money and more time and more effort than anything else that I could see. And what I want to know is that do you have any plan in the future where you're gonna make horse racing more accessible and easier to jump into the horse racing scene? Whether how do I say this? Do you have any idea how we can make horse racing very, not expensive?
Okay, well, I think we have enough to answer your question, and I do think that there are things being done that are unheralded. Like, I'll give you for example. The other day, about 2 weeks ago, I went to the races with my mother at Churchill Downs, and I was surprised when I walked in the gate at Churchill Downs, and this is just a general admission gate, that they have free programs with the full past performances there, sitting out for everybody to take. And I was like, wow, what a wonderful thing. Nobody ever talks about that. They always just talk about all the terrible things Churchill Downs does. And so a lot of these things just aren't talked about, even by the racetracks themselves. Like, Churchill Downs isn't like beating the drum saying, hey, we're doing this. And so what is it that your racetracks can do? Because I think a lot of you are doing things to make it more affordable, but what can you do to make people know that it's more affordable than they think it is?
Marketing, definitely through social media, through other means. And I know the bar may seem high, but I live in New York, and compare going to any NYRA track versus going to a Yankee game, to a Met game, much more value, much more prolonged experience. Yeah. You're there for a more amount of time. You can also win money in your pocket as well on hand. But we have to work on our messaging, specifically through free messaging, whether it's the Instagram, TikToks, whatever platforms, and saying, Saratoga, general admission, $10.
And not only that, if you buy it for the meet, it's way cheaper than that. If you buy like a season pass for Saratoga.
Correct. And there's means, and of course, with the proliferation, with, of course, legalized gambling and historical horse racing on racetracks, sometimes entry is no fee. Yeah. You can walk in and enjoy the races. So we have to promote that more as well. So make sure that you're coming in through that side and get to experience a whole day, and it's going to be at a way lesser cost than it would be compared to other professional sports.
Jeff, I assume you're promoting this on the show that you do
Absolutely.
every
We have free parking, free admission at parks, so we can't go wrong, but we constantly, you beat that drum. But yeah, I think what Naj said, just getting we're doing a lot of the things, it's just getting that messaging out there. So we don't have to necessarily start from scratch, but we just have to promote what we're doing and promote, how it is, how accessible it is. And luckily, if people are in Ben Salem, they can catch live racing 3 days a week and free parking, free admission.
I have to say I'm honored that we have a question from the esteemed Ray Pollock. Yes, Mr. Pollock.
Question, I guess, for anybody up there. Do you think racing is maybe evolving away from a sport that depends on betting on horses to creating experiences? Because I'm hearing so much about things that aren't related to betting. Yeah, and a lot of the tracks now really don't depend on handle as much as they, like some don't depend on it at all. But I'm just wondering if that's the direction that you see the sport going 20 to 30 years from now, if it's still around.
Great question, Ray. I know in New York, we're focused on developing pari-mutuel players. Now, we want to do that through various means, lowering the entry points, if we can get fixed odds wagering in New York, if we can get prop bets, but we always want to cultivate and grow bettors. Can we do that through experiences? For instance, the college days, through college programs, but we need to cultivate bettors. And as you mentioned, Ray, we need to cultivate parimutuel players. We need to get fans of the sport. Experiences are great. They open the door. They'll get people there. But we need to work on, as I think everybody on this panel talked about, how can we create that one-sheeter? And so it's, okay, I can identify this horse. I can bet this horse, and I understand what's going on. I'm not just playing a name.
Yeah.
I'm not just playing colors.
Picking a color.
But I'm getting, that first entryway into developing myself as a knowledgeable gambler and transitioning on to becoming a full-time, everyday proponent and follower and fan of the sport.
I think a great word to use there was just development. I think that the reason that I think we focus so much on exposure and getting people to the racetrack is, when I started out as a racing fan at the age of 4, was I, betting the races? No, but 14 years later when it was legal, absolutely. I mean, this morning I put a few bets in before we got to talk just so I made sure I didn't miss any, right? So it's about development at the end of the day. And I think that's where we often fall short, right? Where we sometimes focus on, okay, we got you in the track, and then there's nothing after that. Or, great, you're a returning customer. Okay, there's nothing after that. And there needs to be more of a connection and a development and a path that people can follow. I mean, it's very fluid, of course. I mean, it's not like there's a concrete way, but just finding new creative ways to develop people over time and promote that. And then, of course, that's going to help handle. And one more thing, I think there's just going to be a balance 20 to 30 years from now to answer your question. I think you go back to the old days when racing was at its peak, the 30s and 40s, right? That's what it was. People came to the track, and yeah, they bet, but they were there to be together for the purpose of the sport. It combined all the things. So coming back and finding that balance is going to be crucial, I think, to the sustainability, and hopefully 20 to 30 years from now we'll have that.
Yes.
We have time for one more?
Yep.
I want to jump back to the equine welfare component for a moment, and we discussed how certain tracks, such as Naira and Parks, have those funds dedicated towards second careers or aftercare, but it's not universal. It's very, jurisdictional. Is there any chance that HISA would start incorporating aftercare or second career planning as part of the accreditation process?
Okay, well, that question is not exactly related to any of the subjects we've had, but
Yeah.
if Sam or Alexa would like to address that, I will let you, and if you would like to decline, that's fine too.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that after the fact.
Sure.
After the meeting.
So I can tell you, I've been on the board of the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance for a number of years. I just rotated off for a year, and I'm getting ready to go back on, and it's something we've been, the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance was created to have systemic, reliable funding for aftercare, and we've made a lot of progress, and we still have a long ways to go. And so it's something that everybody in the industry realizes we need to do more, and we're trying to figure out how to do it. So if we don't have any other, do you have a question? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, okay. So you guys have used the term social license over and over again, which I have not heard that term in years, so whatever. What does that look like? Obviously, we're talking about moving forward, but does that look different for the older generation that we have obviously very involved in racing? So does social license operate, does that look different holding on to that older generation and then also trying to grab on to a newer generation? And how do you anticipate trying to bridge that gap? Because something like TikTok, you're trying to grab that new generation, but the older people in racing are I don't even know what TikTok is.
I'm going to initially answer that because it really came into play when we had too many catastrophic injuries at the racetrack. Right. And everybody was afraid we would lose our social license to operate. And those numbers needed to come down, and they have come down precipitously. And HISA's played a big role in that, but California really took the lead on that. And they were the ones who sort of implemented a lot of programs that the rest of the industry started to follow, and that HISA created a lot of their rules around. So I don't know if any of you want to address that any further.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, every step that we take, and I spoke earlier about changing some of the nomenclature, even from our television broadcasters, terms that could be definitely softened or, help, promote growth of the sport, crop versus whip. Braking versus leaving the gate. Any of these small items, I think even for older generations will help ensure that we're expanding and, helping our social license. Just as a general fan, when my mom is watching races and she's saying, baby races, what are racing babies? Tell me more. Then of course I have to explain it, but if we can find new terms and definitely ease that entryway, even where there's older generations that are from our younger generation as well. I think
Yeah, that was my question, is how do you bridge that divide between?
I think the divide comes from that we don't have an agrarian society anymore. And so a lot of that, the terms that we were okay with came from people who grew up on farms, and they totally looked at horses as livestock rather than pets. And now we have a society that looks at horses as pets, and we have to bridge that gap between what their tolerance level is going to be and the reality of what horse racing is.
Yeah, I think, speaking from experience, I've spoken to older individuals in this industry that their level of acceptance and describing of things, not that they're okay with horses getting hurt or with catastrophic injuries, but the way that they relate to it is very different from how people in our generation relate to it and accept it or don't accept it. And I think, when we had the rash of fatalities last year for Churchill Downs, when I'm getting texts from my friends, why are horses dying? It can't just be, well, this is how it is,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. You've heard from the next generation. Before I wrap up this panel, I just want to make sure that you stick around for the 50 ideas in 50 minutes. It's going to be a lot of rapid fire, and Ray Pollock, to your point, there are some ideas in there that give ideas to how do we do it, how do we bridge that gap between bringing fans to the racetrack and then taking them to that next level of having them be players in the racetrack. And so it's going to be rapid fire, and we have a great panel. But before we move on to that panel, that's at 4 o'clock. You'll have a little bit of a break. I want to give a huge round of applause for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Donna. Great job. I think everybody will agree the next generation, we're in pretty good hands with this group. So another round of applause for this group here. Thank you. All right, as Donna mentioned, 4 o'clock. We'll start in about 10 minutes. Thank you.